At the moment, we're shedding just reams of data that are increasingly being consolidated under the umbrellas of Google, Amazon, and Apple. I think that what we're probably looking at is a consolidated, unified record.
Hi, I'm Ian Bremmer, and welcome to the GZERO World Podcast, an audio version of what you can find on public television, where I analyze global topics, sit down with big guests, and make use of small puppets. This week, I sit down with Amy Webb. She's a leading futurist and professor at NYU who has written extensively about artificial intelligence and how companies are turning the human-machine relationship on its head. Let's get to it.
The GZERO World is brought to you by our founding sponsor, First Republic. First Republic, a private bank and wealth management company, places clients' needs first by providing responsive, relevant, and customized solutions. Visit firstrepublic.com to learn more.
This is Amy Webb, and she is professor at NYU and the founder of the Future Today Institute and the author of a great new book called The Big Nine. And The Big Nine, I don't usually start with books, but in this case, the book is really interesting, and it's actually what I want to talk about because it's related to AI and technology and the Americans and the Chinese, since those are the only players that really matter, right? The Big Nine are the big nine companies, 6 American, 3 Chinese, no other companies. You even think like maybe I'll throw in like a Samsung, I'll throw in like something European.
So here's the thing. It doesn't mean that there aren't other players in the space. The 3 Chinese companies are Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, the bat. And a lot of people say, well, why wasn't Huawei on the list? And the reason is because Huawei is certainly making components and pieces that fit into the ecosystem, but it is these 3 companies, along with the 6 in the United States, that have the lion's share of patents. They have most of the political capital. They are able to attract the best talent. They have the best partnerships with universities. It's their frameworks. It's their custom silicon. It's their algorithms. It's their corpora. They are the ones that are building the future of AI, and as a result, the future of humanity.
What is the way in which you think AI has most changed society so far?
Well, and this is like not a singular technology. There are millions of different decisions that are being made for us all day long. And as a result, we don't really recognize that is AI. In fact,
we're being steered, we're being nudged.
Yeah, we're being nudged. And so whether it's the autocomplete in your text message or the autocomplete in your inbox, if you're on your mobile device, that seems totally insignificant, but it's shifting how we communicate with each other. And it's starting to shift our expectations for what that communication might look like. Can I give you a bizarre example of this?
Absolutely, yeah. Is this one that's happened to you?
This is one that's happened to me just a couple days ago. So I was in the process of texting my husband, and in the middle of all this, I got back a response that sounded canned. And it just irritated me. And so I made a phone call on my phone.
Which you never do.
No, who does that?
Nobody calls, yeah.
And I was like, what the hell? Like, what do you can't take 5 seconds to text me something back in a meaningful way?
What was the actual canned response, since we're going there?
It was, that's great, ! Which he's like, I know that seems innocuous, but he's never written that ever. And it was just easier for him, to click that button.
Click the button.
But, and I guess in the long grand scheme of things, maybe it doesn't matter that much, but it shifts the human relationship that we have with technology as an intermediary and AI as the driving force that connects everybody together.
Now, before we get into what it means politically and economically and geopolitically, that the Americans and Chinese are the ones with the companies that are dominating the space. What does it mean socially and culturally for the kinds of nudging that you're talking about? How is it different that the Americans are the ones that are doing this as opposed to if it were the Europeans or it were the Canadians, for example?
That's a really good question. We don't have a singular dominant American culture that I could describe in any meaningful way. I mean, we're an amalgam. We're made up of lots of different cultures and traditions and ideas. And so we have a relatively homogenous group of people who don't share the same worldviews and experiences as everybody else. whose code and corpora databases are being used to make decisions on behalf of all of us. So, that has different modalities. If you type in CEO to Google image search, you get a homogenous list of white men back. Do you have any idea who the first woman is that showed up on that list as the first woman CEO?
First
I'm going to hazard a guess.
woman CEO. I'm going to say Meg Whitman.
So a lot of people think that. It wasn't.
Indra Nooyi.
No,
Not even
she's
CEO
not even-
anymore, but people know her very. She's iconic.
So she's like a number 2. It was CEO Barbie.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. So like
really?
so it's like funny.
Who is the CEO? Barbie?
And then it's not funny.
Oh, you mean the actual
No,
doll?
like the doll.
The doll. CEO.
Right, not like the CEO of Mattel, like CEO Barbie, blonde,
Yeah.
doll. So
She probably still pulls down more than a lot of the actual women CEOs in the space.
actually, they recognized that this was a problem and went in to try to train it. But it's good to sort of figure out what's going on here and how do we get to this point. So you wind up with this initial training set, this initial data, which populates the search results. And as we continue to click and then select what it is that we're looking for, it becomes this sort of loop. We get stuck in this loop where, again, we're selecting based on a very, very limited set of criteria. So if it takes a long time to get to a person of color or a woman, it becomes this closed loop where our values are reflected back to us in sort of weird ways.
And this gets to a point that I think is frequently mentioned as a conventional wisdom and is really wrong, right? That technology is value neutral and it is a multiplier. So whatever you have, you get more. And yet, I mean, it seems that actually implicit in the code that is being written are all sorts of values that are actually determining nudging behaviors and outcomes. And what I see from your writings and what you're talking about is that AI is doing that so much more insidiously and holistically than any of us have experienced before.
That's right, and most of it's invisible. And in fact, Marvin Minsky, who was one of the modern pioneers of AI, often said, by the time that agent or that AI is so firmly a part of our business processes or daily living, whatever it is that we're doing, we no longer recognize it as artificial intelligence. So on paper, a lot of this makes sense. The challenge is that in order for algorithmic decision-making systems to work correctly, they have to be specific. In order to be specific, you can't have any flexibility, which means that when
you can't consider every scenario.
That's right. So we've become acclimated to obeying.
Now, let me push you a little bit in terms of, I accept the fact that, we don't want to single out individual CEOs or corporations and say they're evil. Google was all don't be evil, right? Which they don't have anymore, but nonetheless, right? It was a nice idea. But when your business model, when intrinsic to your business model is the optimization of data aggregation that makes you turn consumers into products, isn't there something kind of dystopian about the business model?
A little bit. On the other hand, the consumers are all getting something for free, right? So it's 2019.
Right.
So if you are a consumer who doesn't, maybe this is a fallacy of our education system. There's a lot of reasons that we wound up at this particular moment in time, but if you're getting all of this stuff for free and there's not a single part of you that's saying, well, maybe on the back end I'm giving up something that I'm not aware of. And not just an email, but I don't know if you did this. Google had, over the holidays, a system where you could upload your photo, a selfie, and it would tell you which fine art photo you look like.
Oh, I remember that. I did not do that, but I did.
Yeah, so a bunch of people, celebrities were doing this. Everybody was excited to share. That was an enormous machine learning project.
For that,
right?
Of course. It's not being offered for free.
So again, So there are ways in which this is being, I think, intentionally obscured. There are other cases where, Flickr, for example, everybody uploaded their photos to Flickr, the photo sharing website, and had the Creative Commons license set so that it was publicly, and people probably didn't realize how they were setting the licenses, but that enabled IBM to go in with altruistic purposes. It was trying to build a better machine learning database with much more diverse faces. But they scraped millions and millions of photos in order to train their systems, and some people got pretty upset about that. So I think what this comes down to is transparency.
What are we doing? and why
What are we
doing
doing?
it?
What does the data governance look like?
So I want to get into the impact of all this on where the world is heading, which you spend a lot of time on. But I guess first I want to ask you, because you know these companies and you've been watching these companies, and not all companies are created equal. If you had to pick one of these 9 that you were going to work in, equivalent money, equivalent job, let's even say the location was the same. So in other words, your life is not being changed. It's just about the company and what they're doing and their culture. It would be which one?
Well, you're asking me 2 different questions. So, because culture is a big question.
Yes.
Who's doing remarkable work?
Yeah, is the other question. And it was not necessarily a line, that's
yeah,
right.
so, I mean,
okay, so
those
let's talk
are
about both of them. Let's talk about both of them. So first, who's doing the work that you think is most
Amazon.
remarkable right now?
Amazon.
Because?
I am fascinated by Jeff Bezos, who is, I think...
Well, he's available apparently, so
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I don't know what his... Well, we know what his texting is like.
No, we do actually. Yes, we do. Yeah.
I think he is one of our most capable and prolific long-term thinkers alive today. And I think also pretty good when it comes to strategy. With that being said, Amazon is fairly far ahead in its thinking on biometric data scraping and how that might be used to learn more about us and to connect us in new and different interesting ways.
What do you think they're going to be capable of doing with that we'll be surprised by?
Sure. So again, I think this is automating a lot of our daily functions. I mean, one of the theories that I've been modeling, again, with data is, as our homes become more and more automated, where do our data ultimately end up and in what circumstances? So at the moment, we're shedding just reams of data all day long that are increasingly being consolidated under the umbrellas of Google, Amazon, and Apple throughout the world. I think that what we're probably looking at is a consolidated, unified record. So at the moment, many people...
Of individuals.
That's right. So sort of like, I call it a personal data record, where all of your digital data, but also increasingly your health data, which, by the way, these 3 companies are all pretty far ahead and working on. Your education data, Salesforce is working on a new system to create portable education records. So if all of this winds up under a unified record, which I think it probably will.
And by the way, you're not saying this unified record is something that we will have. You're saying this is a unified record that they will have.
Well, that's the question. Who is it? Ownership versus stewardship? How does it move? Is it heritable? These are really important questions for us to be thinking about, but there are also economic consequences and opportunities. So we know that automation is coming. Nobody will say this out loud because it's unpopular, but a whole bunch of people are going to lose their jobs, and there is no way to upskill them. They are just going to lose their jobs, and it's going to be really hard to fit them into our existing economic structures.
Over the next few decades, what scale of displacement are we actually talking about here?
So again,
percentage of workforce, roughly.
I would never answer that question because we don't know yet. So there's a lot of.
But when you say people that can't be upskilled, right?
Right.
I mean, that happens. I guess I'm saying, because I know all of the sorts of jobs in white collar, blue collar jobs that show that different components of them can be automated away.
Right.
But that's different from saying, do we think people that can't be upskilled? That's a different question.
Sure.
Is that like a 5%, a 10%, maybe a 50%? Do you have any remote sense over the coming decades of what kind of number we're talking about there?
I this is not a hedge or me trying to shirk the question. I just, to me, it's not entirely relevant because, well, for one thing, the BLS, where the data in the United States is housed on labor, like this is a fun project for anybody who wants to take it on. A lot of those job titles are completely irrelevant. They don't exist. So even tracking at the moment which jobs there are and how they're going to be automated, the numbers, it's a lot. It's more than our current social structures are set up to handle. Therefore, when we talk about these great big New Deal policies, or we talk about new social welfare systems or social trampolines, enabling people to bounce in and out, I think we are again trying to use something that might have worked in a different era and apply it as though it still makes sense today. So here's where the personal data record, I think, could come in really handy. We're already being monetized by these companies.
Yes.
These companies who, like it or not, are going to face regulation. So one way to appease the Hill and appease, I'm assuming, the EU, provide some transparency and help us out with the automation issue, is to treat our data as it moves, every single one of those transactions, as a packet that can be monetized. It's a different approach to universal basic income. So we each get paid every time at some point along the chain. I mean, tiny amounts of money.
Because we're creating value.
That's right. Our value is recognized.
So,
we're
for
being monetized
example,
on the other
if
end.
we were all on bicycles for a few hours a day and they were making energy, we should get a couple dollars for that.
Sure. Or if you're searching the internet for an hour a day and you're being tracked and retargeted and served ads, you're not, ads are one thing, but there's a lot of data that you're shedding that's being used by other companies as part of that process. All I'm saying is, let's just be open about it and give everybody a couple of fractions of a penny every time that happens. That doesn't, I think that winds up, as strange as this sounds, becoming an economic incentive for the big companies because it appeases would-be regulators. It doesn't ultimately bleed all that much cash, and it allows them buy-in from us and the ability to use our data in a much more profound way without, restrictions.
Now, one of the scary things that comes from that kind of a model is that these companies are then creating ecosystems around very different types of consumption models.
That's right. I will tell you that at the moment, I don't use very many Apple products because I can't stand the way that those systems are locked down. So one of the things that I've envisioned and modeled is that Amazon sort of becomes the de facto lower income product. Amazon has, I think, 153 Amazon Basics products that it's already selling. Some of those are now devices that you talk to that collect data. The opposite end of that spectrum is Apple. Where the products are increasingly cost prohibitive for people who are on the lower part of the economic strata.
So that sounds good in the sense that people will get paid for their data, but it sounds bad in the sense that you're really solidifying levels of inequality
That's right.
that exist inside the West right now.
That's right, in ways that I think we may later come to regret, because we're not just talking about who has access to what device. I think we're also talking about permissions and having the choice to be anonymous when you want to be, and have the choice to not be listened in on or not be nudged. Here's another great example. Let's say that you're living in your Amazon home, and and all of these companies are also increasingly connected to and learning about the grid, power grid. It's a relatively nice day outside. Your home could decide not to open up the garage door, because you should be able to walk that mile to work. Somebody somewhere has decided that, we should be thinking about the environment. You could stand to burn some calories. So you lose the ability to drive your car on that day.
Or your healthcare premiums go up.
Or your healthcare premiums go up, or you can't wash your jeans. If you're living in Austin, Texas, where there's been drought, going on for a while, maybe your washing machine decides that you could probably get another day or two out of the jeans. I don't want to be living in a situation where lower income people lose so much control over so many facets of their daily life. I'm not saying that that's on anybody's product roadmap at the moment. I'm just saying that if you look at all of the data that we have access to and model that out, these are plausible outcomes.
It sounds a lot like where you think AI is heading for the underclass in the United States is increasingly where it already is in China.
Yeah, China's difficult. And I think we hear a lot of stories about the social credit score system.
So if you're monetizing people's data and you have a personal data record and everything is increasingly being determined by either one government, China, or one company in the United States, how do we avoid a situation where the nudging that's presently happening is actually going to become much more all-encompassing behavioral control for large segments of the population that doesn't have the ability to pay for privacy?
Right, so that's a really smart, I really love the way you phrase that question, because it's an acknowledgement that while we point our finger at what's happening in China and their social credit scoring system.
What's happening here is very similar.
That's right, it's just not as codified.
So Amy Webb, you gotta pay attention to her or you're all gonna be consigned to Amazon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.
That's our show this week. We'll be right back here next week, same place, same time, unless you're watching on social media, in which case it's wherever you happen to be. Don't miss it. In the meantime, check us out at GZEROmedia.com.
The GZERO World is brought to you by our founding sponsor, First Republic. First Republic, a private bank and wealth management company, places clients' needs first by providing responsive, relevant, and customized solutions. Visit firstrepublic.com to learn more.